Mr. Hice, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the long-range acoustic device that was used. What is the range of that device when it comes to warning the crowd?
Sir, it's been some time since I read the actual specs of the long-range acoustic device, but I want to say it's 600 meters.
Okay, were the protesters within that range?
Yes, I would estimate that they were where we had it set up, which was we're in the center of the park and on the the northeast section of the center of the park. And I would say we were within 45 meters of the protesters.
So they were in range of hearing. We also know that protesters must have the ability to leave an area. What courses of actions did the park police consider when discussing that issue?
Yes, sir. So when implementing our plan to clear the north side of Lafayette Park and 8th Street, we moved the crowd from east to west, and then their path of exit was either north on 16th Street towards India Street, or continued west to 17th and H, or Connecticut and H.
So that is the direction that the officers were pushing the protesters?
That was the movement from east to west, correct?
Okay. Were the protesters in any way prevented from leaving the square by the police?
No, they were not.
Okay. You mentioned earlier the various acts of violence, the projectiles that were being thrown, and the injuries that were sustained. There was everything from frozen water bottles to bricks, caustic liquids, and a weekend of violent protest. You mentioned 51 officers injured. Of course, we know about the arsons at the St. John's Church and so forth. We also know from intelligence reports that there were calls by police officers regarding violence against them. There were also caches found of glass bottles, baseball bats, metal poles along the way. I'm curious, from the time from then to now, has there been any type of investigation to see whether or not there were any specific groups or a group that was involved in organizing all of this?
Yes, so the United States Park Police has coordinated with a number of our federal partners in follow-up investigations on some of the violence that we saw, the assaults on officers. We've been successful in obtaining a number of arrest warrants for individuals that were either involved in assaults against police officers or damage to park resources. In terms of a nexus to larger groups, that's an ongoing effort.
When do you think that may be determined?
Yeah, I don't know if I could say, as I sit here today. Again, these are ongoing investigations, and as we gather more information and as additional arrests are made, all of the intel that's gathered from those arrests contributes to any nexus to a larger effort.
It just appears that in some other places throughout the country there are specific groups that are behind it. I was curious if that was the same here, but that investigation is still underway, is what you're saying?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Recently, there was a video that circulated that shows Representative Jerry Nadler, of course, chairman of the Judiciary, stating that many of these protests were, in essence, a myth as far as the violence within the protests. Would you agree with that?
No, sir, I would not agree. I think based on the level of violence and sustained violence that we saw beginning on May 29th through June 1st, this was one of the most violent protests that I've been a part of in my 23 years with the United States Park Police.
One of the most. What would be another one that would rank up there in your memory?
The Occupy DC demonstrations from several years ago, and then the World Bank demonstrations.
Okay. It just is amazing to me that we are, as Representative Westerman mentioned, this is just nothing more than political theater to come here and somehow pretend as though these were peaceful protesters, where the evidence is abundant, everything from arson to vandalism to 51 injured officers. This was anything but peaceful, and the reason it did not sustain that kind of momentum in Washington, D.C. is because the Parks Police and others got involved to put a stop to it. And so I want to thank you for your service. in that regard in maintaining the safety of Washington DC and beyond. We are appreciative of that. And Mr. Chairman, before I yield, I do have a letter from the federal law enforcement officers that I would ask unanimous consent to have submitted to the record. Thank you, sir. I yield.
I ask Mr. Lowenthal for, you're recognized, sir.